For 93 days, the nation's most feared mafia boss lay perfectly still, surrounded by enough armed guards to protect a president. Politicians, billionaires, and old allies lined up outside his hospital room every morning, convinced they would be the first face he recognized if he ever opened his eyes again. His elegant fiancée rehearsed tearful speeches. His family whispered promises they had never kept before. Everyone wanted to be remembered, but every night, after the cameras disappeared and the hallways fell silent, only one person stayed without expecting anything in return. A quiet plus-size night nurse named Hannah Reed. She spoke to a man who never answered. She read stories to someone everyone believed couldn't hear. Then, on the 94th morning, Gabriel Marchetti opened his eyes, looked past every familiar face, and reached only for her. "You're the voice that kept me alive." Long before dawn, when the city still glittered beneath a blanket of rain and silence, Hannah Reed walked through the employee entrance carrying the same faded canvas bag she had owned since nursing school. She greeted the security guard with a warm smile that he barely noticed before returning to his phone. It was the beginning of another 12-hour night shift. By now, everyone at St. Aurelius Medical Center knew which assignments no one wanted. The heaviest patients, the longest medication rounds, the endless paperwork. Whenever those duties appeared on the schedule, someone inevitably sighed and said, "Give them to Hannah. She never complains." And they were right. She never did. At 29, Hannah had become almost invisible inside the hospital. Her soft voice was easy to overlook. Her plus-size figure made her the target of careless jokes whispered in break rooms. Younger nurses with polished makeup often received compliments from wealthy visitors, while Hannah slipped quietly from room to room, changing dressings, calming frightened patients, and cleaning up messes no one else wanted to touch. She had learned years ago that kindness rarely earned applause, but she also believed that suffering should never have to ask for permission before receiving compassion. That belief was why she always volunteered for the intensive care wing, especially room 917. The room looked less like a hospital suite and more like the headquarters of a private government. Armed guards stood outside 24 hours a day. Surveillance cameras watched every entrance. Fresh flowers arrived every morning from politicians, business leaders, and people whose names appeared on magazine covers. Inside the room lay Gabriel Marchetti, even unconscious. He carried an intimidating presence. The scars across his hands hinted at a lifetime of violence and impossible decisions. Newspapers called him a criminal mastermind. Television analysts called him a billionaire businessman. Depending on whom one asked, he was either the city's greatest protector or its greatest threat. To Hannah, he was simply another patient. Every evening, she checked his medication chart with the same careful attention she gave everyone else. She adjusted his pillows to prevent pressure injuries. She moisturized the dry skin on his hands. She spoke aloud before every procedure, explaining exactly what she was about to do, even though doctors insisted he couldn't hear. "You deserve dignity," she whispered one night while straightening his blanket. "Whether you answer me or not." No one was there to hear her. No one except the sleeping man. During visiting hours, room 917 transformed into a stage. Gabriel's elegant fiancée, Isabel Grant, entered wearing perfectly tailored dresses and flawless makeup. She held his hand just long enough for photographers waiting outside to capture the image through the open doorway. She cried beautifully whenever reporters were nearby. But Hannah noticed something strange. The moment the cameras disappeared, Isabel always found an excuse to leave. Business meeting, phone call, migraine, dinner reservation, anything except staying through the night. Gabriel's mother, Diane Marchetti, visited more sincerely. She often sat quietly for an hour, brushing her son's hair back from his forehead before leaving with tired eyes that revealed months without proper sleep. Victor Lang, Gabriel's longtime advisor, rarely spoke at all. He spent most visits answering encrypted phone calls in the hallway before disappearing again. Every person seemed to need something from the unconscious man. Power, money, security, closure. Only Hannah expected nothing. After midnight, when monitors hummed softly and footsteps faded into distant corridors, She pulled a worn paperback novel from her canvas bag. Its corners were bent. Several pages had been repaired with transparent tape. It had belonged to her father before cancer claimed him years earlier. She settled into the chair beside Gabriel's bed. Then she began reading. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for the words to fill the quiet room. Some nights, she read adventure stories. Other nights, she read poetry. Sometimes, after finishing a chapter, she spoke about ordinary things. The little bakery that burned its croissants every Tuesday, the elderly patient who insisted nurses were angels disguised in scrubs, the stray orange cat that waited outside the emergency entrance every morning hoping for breakfast. She knew how ridiculous it probably looked, talking to someone who never answered. Yet an old neurology professor had once told her something she never forgot. Hearing is often the last bridge between consciousness and silence. Never assume your patient is truly alone. So she kept talking, night after night, for 93 nights. One rainy evening, while adjusting Gabriel's blanket, Hannah felt something unusual, a faint pressure, so slight she almost doubted herself. She froze. His index finger seemed to curl around hers, only for a heartbeat, then it was gone. She immediately checked the monitors. Heart rate stable, blood pressure unchanged. She documented the possible movement and informed the attending physician. Dr. Aaron Reeves barely glanced at the chart. Probably a reflex, he said. It happens. The morning team laughed it off before moving to the next patient. By the following evening, no one mentioned it again, except Hannah. She continued watching carefully, not hoping, simply paying attention, because patients had surprise medicine before, and sometimes the smallest movement carried the greatest meaning. Outside room 917, the city continued believing Gabriel Marchetti would either awaken as the same feared mafia boss or never awaken at all. Inside the room, something far quieter was unfolding. Every familiar voice came and went. Every expensive promise faded into silence. Only one voice remained until sunrise. Hannah never realized that somewhere behind closed eyelids and broken memories, someone was still listening. Then, just before the end of another ordinary night shift, she reached to straighten Gabriel's blanket one last time. His hand closed around her wrist. Not a reflex, not imagination, a deliberate grip. Before she could call for help, his fingers loosened again, and the heart monitor never changed. At 6 to 17 the following morning, the first alarm sounded. It wasn't loud, just a single unfamiliar change in the steady rhythm of Gabriel Marchetti's heart monitor. A respiratory therapist looked up. Then another nurse noticed his eyelids twitch. Within seconds, the intensive care unit transformed into controlled chaos. Call Dr. Reeves. Notify neurology. Increase observation. The overhead paging system echoed through the corridor as physicians rushed toward room 917. Security officers tightened the perimeter while Derek Malone, Gabriel's longtime head of security, ordered every entrance sealed. News of the movement spread through the building faster than any official announcement. By the time Dr. Aaron Reeves entered the room, Gabriel's fingers were moving again. This time, there was no doubt. His breathing deepened. His jaw shifted. Then, after 93 endless days between life and death, his eyes slowly opened. For several silent seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling. The bright lights seemed unfamiliar. The machines surrounding him sounded distant. His expression held no fear, only confusion. Gabriel? Doctor. Reeves leaned closer. If you can hear me, blink twice. Gabriel obeyed. A collective sigh swept across the room. Doctors exchanged relieved glances. Nurses smiled behind their masks. Someone quietly whispered, "He's back." Within minutes, the hallway filled with people who had been waiting for this moment. Diane arrived first, tears streaming freely as she rushed to her son's bedside. "My boy." She reached for his hand. Gabriel looked at her politely. His eyes searched her face with quiet concentration. Nothing. No recognition. Only the uncertain gaze of a man staring at a stranger. "Do I know you?" he asked, his voice rough from months without speech. The words struck Diane harder than any diagnosis ever could. Dr. Reeves immediately began neurological assessments. What is today's date? Gabriel frowned. I don't know. Do you remember your full name? After several seconds, he answered, Gabriel. A pause, then another. Gabriel. His forehead tightened as though searching through thick fog. I can't remember the rest. The doctor wrote several notes. Memory impairment. Expected after prolonged coma. Still too early to determine severity. Before anyone could continue, the doors opened again. Isabel Grant hurried inside wearing a cream-colored designer dress, her mascara already perfectly smudged into carefully arranged tears. She dropped beside the bed. Oh, Gabriel. She clutched his arm dramatically. You came back to me. Everyone watched for his reaction. Gabriel studied her face even longer than he had studied his mother's. Nothing. His expression remained blank. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Who are you? Silence filled the room. Isabel's smile froze. It's me. She forced a laugh. Your fiancé. Gabriel blinked. The word meant nothing. I'm supposed to marry you? She nodded quickly. Yes. He continued staring. No warmth appeared in his eyes. No relief. No memory. Only polite confusion. Dr. Reeves gently separated them. Please, everyone. His brain needs time. Don't overwhelm him. More visitors arrived throughout the morning. Victor Lang introduced himself. Gabriel failed to recognize him. Derek Malone stepped forward. No response. Even old photographs produced only fragments of uncertainty. Faces, names, places, everything had dissolved into mist. Yet something unusual kept happening. Every few minutes, Gabriel seemed distracted. His head turned slightly toward the doorway, almost as though he were listening for something. Doctor, Reeves noticed. Is something bothering you? Gabriel hesitated. I keep thinking. He closed his eyes. I should be hearing someone's voice. The room exchanged puzzled looks. What voice? The doctor asked. I don't know. Gabriel rubbed his forehead weakly. A woman. Everyone assumed he meant Isabel. She immediately leaned closer. I'm right here. Gabriel looked directly at her, then slowly shook his head. No, not you. Isabel's confident expression cracked for the first time. Throughout the afternoon, specialists conducted scan after scan. The prognosis remained cautiously optimistic. His speech was intact. Motor function was improving. Long-term memory, however, had suffered severe disruption. Late that evening, visiting hours finally ended. Security escorted everyone into the hallway. Even Isabel reluctantly left after promising she would return first thing in the morning. For the first time all day, room 917 became quiet again. Night shift began. Hannah Reed adjusted the chart outside the room before taking a slow breath. She wasn't sure whether she should feel excited or nervous. For 93 nights, she had cared for a man who couldn't answer. Now he was awake. She quietly entered carrying fresh medication. Gabriel was looking out the window. The city lights reflected across the glass. He turned at the sound of the door opening. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Hannah smiled gently. Good evening, Mr. Marchetti. I hope you're feeling a little stronger. The instant she spoke, something changed. Gabriel's entire expression softened. His breathing caught. His eyes widened. There it is, that voice. The same calm rhythm, the same warmth, the same quiet reassurance that had drifted through endless darkness while his body refused to wake. He couldn't remember faces. He couldn't remember names. But somewhere deep inside his damaged memory, that voice had survived. You? He whispered. Hannah looked surprised. Is everything all right? Instead of answering, Gabriel slowly lifted his trembling hand toward her. Come closer. She hesitated before stepping beside the bed. He studied her face with complete concentration. Then, almost apologetically, he smiled. I don't know your name, but I know, he swallowed. You stayed. Hannah felt a chill travel down her spine. What do you mean? Gabriel closed his eyes. I remember darkness. I remember pain. And every night, he looked at her again. Someone read stories. His voice grew steadier. Someone told me about an old bakery, a stubborn orange cat, and an elderly man who thought nurses were angels. Hannah's heart nearly stopped. Those were conversations she had never shared with anyone else. Not doctors, not co-workers, not Gabriel's family. Only the unconscious patient lying before her. She instinctively glanced toward the hallway, wondering if someone had somehow overheard. No one had. Gabriel reached for her hand. This time his grip was gentle but certain. "I never saw your face," he smiled faintly, "but I would know your voice anywhere." Outside the room, unnoticed by either of them, Isabel had returned after forgetting her handbag. She stood motionless behind the partially open door. And for the first time since Gabriel awakened, fear replaced every tear she had carefully rehearsed. By the third day after Gabriel Marchetti awakened, the story had spread far beyond the walls of St. Aurelius Medical Center. News channels debated his recovery around the clock. Financial markets speculated about his return. Social media obsessed over a single unexpected detail. Why would one of the world's most powerful men refuse to let anyone care for him, except an unknown night nurse? Reporters camped outside the hospital entrances. Helicopters hovered overhead. Every employee was reminded to avoid speaking with the press. Inside the intensive care unit, however, the truth was much quieter. Gabriel simply felt safe whenever Hannah Reed entered the room. He still couldn't remember his empire. He still struggled to recognize family photographs. Entire years of his life remained hidden behind a thick wall of darkness. But every evening, when Hannah greeted him with the same gentle, "Good evening, Mr. Marchetti," the anxiety that tightened his shoulders slowly disappeared. Dr. Aaron Reeves noticed the pattern almost immediately. "His blood pressure stabilizes when she's here," he told the rehabilitation team after reviewing several days of charts. "It isn't medicine. It's familiarity." Although the explanation sounded reasonable, not everyone accepted it. Isabel certainly didn't. She watched through the observation window as Hannah helped Gabriel complete simple physical therapy exercises. When he lost his balance trying to stand for the first time, Hannah instinctively caught his arm before he fell. Gabriel smiled, not because of embarrassment, because he trusted her. That single smile felt like an insult to everything Isabel believed she deserved. Later that afternoon, she cornered Hannah outside the staff lounge. "I'd like a word." Hannah stopped politely. Isabel folded her designer coat across one arm, studying the nurse from head to toe with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You seem to enjoy the attention," Hannah frowned. "I'm only doing my job." "Really?" Isabel stepped closer. "Because the cameras seem to find you everywhere now." "I've never spoken to a reporter." "You don't have to." Isabel's voice hardened. "People love stories about ordinary women changing the lives of powerful men." Hannah lowered her eyes. "I don't want any story. I just want my patient to recover." Isabel laughed softly. "Then perhaps you should remember your place." Without waiting for a response, she walked away. Hannah remained standing in the hallway for several seconds. She had endured criticism her entire career. This wasn't new. Still, something about Isabel's words left an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't explain. That evening, Gabriel noticed immediately that she seemed distracted. "You usually tell me something interesting." She looked up from adjusting his IV line. "What do you mean?" "The bakery, the cat, the funny patients." He smiled faintly. "You haven't mentioned any of them tonight." Hannah couldn't help smiling back. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I don't." He shook his head. "I remember how they made me feel." The answer lingered between them. Gabriel had forgotten facts, but emotions remained. As rehabilitation progressed, fragments of memory began appearing without warning. Sometimes it happened during therapy, sometimes while listening to music, sometimes in complete silence. The flashes never lasted more than a few seconds. A rain-covered windshield, a ringing telephone, someone shouting his name, the smell of gasoline, a woman's calm voice saying, "You're safe now." Each memory disappeared before he could understand it. "Doctor," Reeves encouraged patients, "the brain heals unpredictably," he explained. "Don't force the memories, but don't ignore them either." Gabriel followed the advice. Instead of chasing the images, he wrote them down in a small notebook Hannah had given him. One page, one memory, one question. Soon the notebook became filled with scattered fragments that made little sense together. Yet one detail appeared again and again. A soft female voice, always reassuring, always nearby. One evening, Hannah noticed him staring at the notebook. Any luck? Gabriel handed it to her. She quietly turned the pages. Each sentence was heartbreakingly incomplete. Rain. Broken glass. A hand holding mine. Someone reading. Warm light. Don't fall asleep. Hannah felt tears gathering before she quickly blinked them away. She had never once told him to stay awake, but during countless nights, she had often whispered, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Had he heard that too? Before she could ask, a loud commotion erupted outside the room. Journalists had somehow entered the hospital lobby. Security quickly escorted them away, but not before several photographs were taken through the ICU windows. The next morning, every headline carried the same implication. Mystery nurse captures Mafia Boss's heart. Who is Hannah Reed? Fiancé pushed aside after miracle recovery. The articles contained almost no facts, only speculation. Still, they spread rapidly. Hospital administrators panicked. To protect the institution's reputation, they reassigned Hannah to another floor, effective immediately. Dr. Reeves objected. So did Gabriel Marchetti. The board refused. We cannot appear biased. When Hannah entered Gabriel's room that evening to explain the decision, she tried to sound cheerful. I won't be your nurse after tonight. Gabriel looked up sharply. What? They're moving me. For how long? I'm not sure. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Gabriel spoke. No. She smiled gently. It isn't your decision. It is if I'm the patient. Hannah almost laughed. That's not how hospitals work. Gabriel stared at the floor. Another sharp pain flashed behind his eyes. Suddenly, dark road, heavy rain, a black SUV, headlights rushing closer, someone shouting into a phone. Then, another image, a hospital room, darkness, a woman reading from an old paperback, the smell of chamomile tea. Gabriel grabbed the edge of the bed as the vision disappeared. Gabriel? Hannah hurried forward. Are you all right? He looked at her, breathing heavily. I remembered something. What was it? He searched desperately for the words. There was... He pressed both hands against his temples. A crash. I was driving. No. His expression changed. I wasn't driving. I was... His voice suddenly stopped, his eyes fixed on something over Hannah's shoulder. Standing outside the glass door was Victor Lang. The moment their eyes met, a violent pulse of memory struck Gabriel harder than any before. Not a complete memory, only a single sentence. Clear, sharp, impossible to ignore. Don't trust Victor. Before Gabriel could speak another word, Victor slowly opened the door and stepped inside with his usual calm smile. Gabriel, he said warmly, it's good to see you looking stronger. Gabriel didn't answer. For the first time since waking from his coma, he wasn't confused. He was afraid. Victor Lang never stopped smiling. It was the same calm, reassuring expression he had worn beside Gabriel for nearly 15 years. To everyone else, he looked like a loyal advisor, relieved to see his employer recovering. Only Gabriel saw something different. The instant Victor entered the room, another violent fragment of memory struck him. Rain hammered against a windshield, a phone vibrating on the passenger seat. Victor's voice. Take the coastal road. It's safer. Then nothing. The vision disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. You don't look well, Victor said, stepping closer. Recovery can be exhausting. Gabriel forced himself to remain calm. I suppose it can. For several uncomfortable seconds, neither man spoke. Hannah sensed the tension immediately. She had never seen Gabriel become so guarded around anyone before. Victor finally glanced toward her. I heard the hospital plans to transfer you. Hannah nodded politely. Yes. A shame. His smile remained perfectly polite. Patients become emotionally attached after long illnesses. Something about his tone unsettled her. Not the words, the certainty behind them. As Victor walked away, Gabriel quietly whispered, Don't leave yet. She stayed. Only after the door closed did Gabriel finally exhale. I don't know why. He stared toward the hallway. But every instinct tells me not to trust him. Hannah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she remembered something she had tried very hard to forget. Nearly 6 weeks earlier, during one of her overnight shifts, she had gone to the medication room shortly after 2. 0 inches the morning. The hallway had been empty, or so she thought. As she rounded the corner, She heard two voices inside an office, whose door wasn't fully closed. One belonged to Victor, the other, Isabel. She hadn't intended to listen, but one sentence stopped her cold. If he wakes up before the contracts are finalized, everything falls apart. Another voice answered, "The doctors don't expect that to happen." Hannah remembered standing frozen in the hallway, convinced she had misunderstood. When the conversation ended, she hurried away before either of them noticed her. For weeks, she told herself it had meant something else. Business, legal paperwork, anything. Now she wasn't so sure. She slowly looked at Gabriel. "There might be something I should tell you." Gabriel listened, without interrupting, as she described the conversation, exactly as she remembered it. She never exaggerated. She never claimed certainty. When she finished, silence filled the room. "It isn't proof," she said softly. "I know. I never reported it because I had no idea what they were talking about." Gabriel looked out the window. "You did the right thing. Without evidence, it would only have sounded like gossip." He closed his eyes. The headache returned. This time, the memories lasted longer. He remembered leaving a charity banquet. He remembered refusing a bodyguard because he wanted a few minutes alone. He remembered Victor insisting on changing the route home at the last minute. Then, bright headlights. A truck crossing the center line. Metal twisting. Glass exploding. Everything went black. Gabriel opened his eyes suddenly. It wasn't random. Hannah looked at him. "What?" "The accident. It was planned." The following morning, Gabriel requested a private meeting with Derek Malone. No family, no advisors, no visitors. Only the man who had protected him for over a decade. When Derek entered, Gabriel asked a single question. "Who ordered the route change the night of my accident?" Derek hesitated. "I assumed you did." "I didn't." Derek's expression slowly hardened. "I'll look into it." For the next 48 hours, Derek quietly reviewed security logs, GPS records, and archived communications. The deeper he searched, the stranger everything became. Several surveillance files had disappeared. Vehicle maintenance records had been altered. One security camera near the crash site had been disabled less than 20 minutes before the collision. Most disturbing of all, Victor had personally overridden Gabriel's usual security protocol that evening. Derek brought every document directly to Gabriel. Neither man spoke for several minutes. Finally, Gabriel looked up. "So I wasn't imagining it?" "No." Derek's voice was grim. "You were betrayed!" The evidence also revealed something unexpected. Large financial transfers had been made from shell companies into accounts controlled by Isabel only weeks after Gabriel's accident. Enough money to disappear forever. Enough money to begin another life. Gabriel stared at the documents. He felt surprisingly little anger, mostly disappointment. He had trusted both of them. Meanwhile, Isabel sensed everything slipping away. She confronted Victor in the underground parking garage beneath the hospital. "You told me there wouldn't be evidence." "There wasn't." Victor's voice remained controlled, though sweat had begun forming along his forehead. "Someone reopened the investigation." "What do we do?" "We leave." "And Gabriel." Victor looked toward the elevator. "If he remembers everything, we're already finished." Neither of them noticed the security camera recording every second of the conversation. Derek did. Within the hour, the footage was safely stored in multiple encrypted locations. That evening, Gabriel asked Hannah to wheel him into the hospital's rehabilitation garden. It was the first time he had felt fresh air since the accident. The sun was setting. Golden light filtered through rows of maple trees. For several peaceful minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Gabriel broke the silence. "When I couldn't move, I thought I was completely alone." Hannah smiled gently. "You weren't. I know that now." He looked at her. "I've spent my entire life judging people by strength, power, influence, wealth." A quiet laugh escaped him. "And the strongest person I ever met wore hospital scrubs." Hannah lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I'm not strong." "You stayed," Gabriel answered simply. "When everyone else visited because they expected something from me, you stayed because you believed I was still a human being." Before Hannah could respond, Derek hurried across the garden. His expression alone told Gabriel everything. "It's confirmed," Derek said. "We have the financial records, the surveillance footage, the route change, and witnesses. Gabriel nodded slowly. Months of darkness had finally given way to the truth. The people he had trusted most had arranged the circumstances that nearly ended his life, yet the person everyone overlooked, the quiet nurse nobody remembered, had unknowingly become the only honest witness left. Gabriel closed the folder without opening it. There will be time for justice. Then he looked at Hannah. But first, I owe someone a thank you I've been trying to say since I opened my eyes. She smiled, unsure what he meant. Gabriel reached into the pocket of his rehabilitation jacket. Inside was the small notebook she had given him days earlier. He opened to the final page. There was only one sentence, written in careful handwriting. I survived, because one voice refused to let silence become the last thing I ever heard. At that exact moment, several black SUVs pulled into the hospital entrance, not visitors, federal investigators. And they were asking for Victor Lang by name. By sunrise, the truth was no longer hiding in whispered conversations or sealed financial records. Federal investigators escorted Victor Lang out of the hospital in handcuffs before the morning staff had even finished changing shifts. Cameras flashed from every direction as he kept his head lowered, refusing to answer a single question. An hour later, Isabel Grant arrived, expecting another carefully staged visit beside Gabriel's bed. Instead, 2 investigators were waiting for her. She denied everything. She insisted the money transfers were innocent investments. She claimed the recordings had been misunderstood, but the evidence told one clear story. The route change, the missing surveillance footage, the secret payments, and finally, the parking garage conversation that neither she nor Victor had realized was being recorded. For the first time in years, there was no performance left to give. Only silence. Gabriel watched the news conference from his hospital room without satisfaction. He had spent much of his life believing betrayal always came from enemies. Instead, it had arrived wearing familiar smiles. A few days later, Diane quietly entered his room carrying no flowers, no gifts, and no prepared speech. She looked older than she had only weeks before. I owe you an apology, she said. Gabriel looked at his mother without speaking. She took a slow breath. I spent years helping you build an empire, but somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention to the people you trusted. Her voice trembled, and while I kept believing appearances, a stranger protected my son better than his own family did. Tears filled her eyes as she turned toward Hannah, who had been preparing medication near the window. Thank you, Diane whispered. I'll regret for the rest of my life that I never truly saw you. Hannah smiled gently. You don't owe me anything. I was simply doing my job. Diane slowly shook her head. No, you reminded all of us what that job actually means. Within a week, Gabriel had recovered enough to leave intensive care. Doctors recommended months of rehabilitation, but they also agreed on one unusual request. Hannah would remain on his recovery team, not because he demanded special treatment, because Dr. Aaron Reeves believed something medicine couldn't easily measure. Healing wasn't only physical. Trust mattered, too. News of the investigation spread around the country. People expected Gabriel Marchetti to respond the way the old mafia boss supposedly would, with revenge. Instead, his first public appearance surprised everyone. Standing before dozens of reporters outside the hospital, he ignored every question about business, power, or the criminal investigation. Instead, he walked to the podium and invited Hannah to stand beside him. She immediately looked uncomfortable. I don't belong up there, she whispered. Gabriel smiled. That's exactly why you do. The cameras followed every step. For a long moment, Gabriel simply looked across the crowd. When I opened my eyes, he began, I couldn't remember my own life. I forgot names. I forgot faces. I even forgot the people I once believed I loved. The reporters listened in complete silence. But there was one thing my mind refused to lose. A voice, a quiet voice that reminded me, night after night, that I was still worth talking to, even when no one believed I could hear. He turned toward Hannah. This woman expected nothing from me. She didn't know whether I would ever wake up. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply chose kindness when no one was watching. The crowd remained completely still. Gabriel continued. Power fades. Money changes hands. Even memory can disappear. But genuine compassion leaves marks that the mind somehow refuses to erase. The following month, Gabriel announced the creation of the Hannah Reed Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting nurses, long-term caregivers, and families of patients recovering from severe brain injuries. Scholarships were funded. Mental health programs for nurses expanded. Hospitals across the state received grants for caregiver training. When journalists asked why he had invested millions into the project, Gabriel always gave the same answer. Because the people standing quietly beside hospital beds are often carrying the weight of entire families. Hannah initially resisted having the foundation bear her name. She insisted countless nurses deserve the recognition instead. Gabriel agreed. So every annual award presented by the foundation honored ordinary caregivers whose compassion had changed lives without attracting headlines. Months passed. Gabriel's strength gradually returned. His memories came back piece by piece. Not every detail. Some fragments of the past remained lost forever. Surprisingly, he no longer considered that a tragedy. Some memories, he realized, were worth leaving behind. One warm spring afternoon, after his final rehabilitation appointment, Gabriel asked Hannah to meet him in the hospital garden. The maple trees had begun growing new leaves. Birds filled the quiet air with songs that neither of them had noticed during those long months of uncertainty. They walked slowly along the same stone path where they had once spoken after the investigation began. Gabriel stopped beside a wooden bench. "You know," he said with a quiet smile, "everyone keeps asking me what the first thing I remembered was." Hannah looked at him curiously. "I thought it was my voice." He shook his head. "No, it was how your voice made me feel." She looked away, suddenly unable to hide the tears gathering in her eyes. Gabriel gently reached for her hand. This time, there were no machines, no bodyguards, no reporters. Just two ordinary people standing beneath the afternoon sun. "If you hadn't believed someone could still hear, I might have forgotten how to find my way back." Hannah squeezed his hand softly. "And if you hadn't listened, I might never have believed that quiet kindness could echo that far." For a while, neither of them spoke. They simply watched patients and families crossing the garden, each carrying invisible battles of their own. Some smiled, some cried, some waited. Life continued. Gabriel finally understood that the greatest act of courage he had ever witnessed hadn't come from violence, wealth, or authority. It had come from a nurse everyone else had overlooked, who chose to stay beside a silent patient because she believed that even the quietest heart might still be listening. And in the end, that quiet voice accomplished something no amount of power ever could. It brought a man back to life.